Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. I'm here to ask and answer one simple question. WTF is Project Highrise. It's a tower management game brought to you by SomaSim, published by Casino Games. Those of you who remember Sim Tower will probably remember it fairly fondly because, in my opinion, it was great. It was actually one of the best SimCity spin-off games they've ever made, if not the best. It had a pseudo-sequel, which was more like an update by the name of Ute Tower, which added a couple of different locations, a few different buildings and things like that, just made some minor updates to it. But since then, there hasn't really been a builder, self-contained tower with a bunch of cool stuff in it game. At least nothing that's really been worthwhile. Now, I was hoping the Project Highrise would fill the bill, and for a little while it did. Unfortunately, the game seems to fizzle out after a few hours, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that as we go in. Firstly, the options menu here does not go default to graphics. To be fair, this is a 2D game. This should run well on pretty much anything, despite the number of buildings and the amount of stuff that's going on, which in itself is really quite impressive in terms of a feat. You've got your time format, number format, hints, and autosave option if you want it. There's your graphics options. Again, not much to see, but you'll understand why. They did add a resolution scale for the user interface, which is nice. That wasn't in the pre-release version, it is now, so if you're running extremely high resolution, you might want to mess with this, or of course, if you just have difficulty seeing it. I do like it when they include these options in games. Full screen on or off. Generally run a game like this in the window, particularly ones quite a lot of waiting. The keyboard shortcuts, well, there really aren't many, as you can clearly see there. This is a mouse-driven game. Unsurprisingly, you'll be able to scroll down here. This is a pretty awkward way of rebinding keys on a one-by-one basis with a drop-down, but the chances are you're not really going to be using the keyboard much anyway. So, in terms of the gameplay, you have your standard run-of-the-mill game. You also have the sandbox here. These are the different options that you can change in terms of difficulty level, lot size, a couple of different options there. You got an advanced option, which basically is the generation seed. So, if, for instance, you're playing and a friend says, hey, you know, you should use this seed, you can go into the same conditions that they went to, and you also have some scenarios available as well. There isn't a full campaign for this. The scenarios are considered the campaign, and you're supposed to work through them and get 3 stars by completing all the objectives. You may also notice it has a mod option. It's got integrated Steam Workshop support, and I think this may actually be key to the longevity of the game, because while it has a reasonable groundwork, the game, as I mentioned previously, fizzles out about 4 or so hours in and runs out of things to do. Now, modding support may very well develop this game into the sort of title that I would want to play for a long period of time, but I've put about 6 hours in according to Steam, and I mean, I'm done with it. I think I've seen everything that there is to see. The scenarios certainly haven't engaged me at all, and unfortunately, the game seems to be just a little bit too easy with very little going on. So let's jump into the game, and I'll show you my tower, which is this one right here. There we go. I've been playing around with a few scenarios here and there, but this is my sandbox tower. This is on the regular difficulty level. Well, welcome to the tower. And as you can see, you're probably going to get a Sim Tower vibe from this. Understandably so. The flat graphic style is very evocative of that title. But it's nice too. You know, there's a good amount of detail. You can zoom all the way in. You've got these characters that they look like they've been rotoscoped. They obviously haven't, but that's sort of the aesthetic style there. And you can even see inside the individual buildings. Unfortunately, a little sort of lack of animation in a lot of these different rooms and apartments and shops. I would like to see maybe a little bit more movement here. Even a game like Sim Tower had some pretty cool little animations, such as inside the movie theater. They'd put different loops in there, and depending on how crowded a place was, it would get busier. There'd be a lot more noise and things like that. That does seem to be somewhat lacking here, although I am impressed by the amount of stuff that's on screen at any given time. All operated and being simulated, and yet not slowing the game down a jot. The game runs absolutely beautifully, so I'll give it a lot of credit for that. So what do? Well, you build your tower. You start off with some very basic buildings. I believe you start with offices only. So if you wanted to start with a residential set of buildings, I don't believe you can do that to start with. Certainly the tutorial told me to build offices immediately. So if you want to specialize your tower, you have to kind of wait a little bit, and it seems to me like the optimal way to build your tower is with offices. It's quite similar to the way Sim Tower was, if I recall correctly. Until you got hotels, you were basically building offices, because while condos and apartments would actually make you a good amount of initial money, they didn't make you money after that, and they would just drain on your resources in terms of maintenance. You have above ground and lower ground here. A lot of the utility buildings and things like that are going to go underground, including your power, your phone connections, your water and gas lines and things like that. And this is fairly critical, because this is how a lot of the buildings in your tower are going to be powered. This is the first issue that I have with it, is that they have taken the idea of power and gas and so on and so forth and included these utilities in the tower construction process, which sounds like a relatively good idea initially, until you realize that it really is a lot of busy work with no actual thought put behind it. So you can see here the electrical network, and generally speaking, outside of the very, very low tier offices, everything needs electricity. Everything. So you might as well connect everything up. The only time this is a problem is when you run out of money. Getting the large electrical transformers not only costs quite a lot of upkeep, but also a big initial investment, although they are much better value and use space more efficiently than the smaller ones. You see, this one takes up 2 blocks here, only provides 10 power. This takes up 4 but provides 150, and is overall cheaper but with a larger initial outlay. You have to put wiring closets on every floor, and these include power, phone, and a cable television connection if you need it. And then you just sort of draw the wires. So let's build a floor and show you exactly how that works. I'm going to add some floor pieces here, just drag it along there, nice and easy. There's your floor. Now, unlike Sim Tower, things do not build immediately in this game. You actually have to have your fellas come up from the maintenance office and start to construct it. So you have to wait a little bit. I'm going to put the express elevator there, and I believe on the other side we also have another elevator. Elevator management is not a theme of this game. You might have noticed when playing Sim Tower that the game actually boiled down purely to elevator management in terms of the game, because that was how everybody got around, and having efficient elevators was the biggest challenge in that title. When you did that wrong, things got absolutely disastrously bad, and people got very, very upset. This game doesn't really have much of that. You know, people seem to be able to find their way to places very, very easily. There we go, cash in at the end of the night. And my maintenance fellows are up there, and they're going to start building that floor. It takes a little bit of time, which does make the construction process a little bit more of a pain in the arse than perhaps it should be. Once you've done that, you then build a wiring closet, get your electrical lines, connect those up. There we go. And then you probably want to connect to water. So you'll need another closet, put a plumbing closet there, connect, there we go. Phone, gas, doing the same sort of thing. The problem with this mechanic is I don't see the purpose of it other than to waste your time. There's really no strategy involved in the placement of this. You only need 1 closet on every floor, so as long as you're not a moron when it comes to design, you could just sort of put them up the center right there. They don't require you to do anything else after the fact, and almost every one of these rooms is going to require some sort of connection. Almost all of them require electricity, most require phone, some require water. You can avoid connecting up certain places if you want to save a little bit of money, but honestly, it just doesn't really matter. Unless you're incredibly short on money one day, you might as well connect everything up. I don't see any real downside to it. The maintenance costs are negligible. Making money in this game is extremely simple. I didn't really design this particularly well, but it's just sitting there ticking over, everybody's happy, and it's making a bunch of money. So really, this is a game about waiting for the next cash flow boost to come in so that I can build some more stuff. Occasionally, places will get a little bit unhappy, and that can cause the prestige of your tower to go down. If the prestige of your tower goes down, then you won't necessarily have access to some of the really, really fancy stuff. But the main problem I've got with the prestige system is not that it exists, because, you know, Sim Tower had a very similar system, and it was actually a star system through 1 through 5, which unlocked a bunch of buildings. This is more granular in the sense that you get a lot more stars, and they unlock different buildings gradually over time. The problem is a lot of them are just bigger, more expensive versions of the same one. So you have 4 different kinds of offices. Small offices, medium, large, and HQ suites. And when you place one of those down, you're going to then have to pick someone to rent it. So let's say I place the big office there. It's probably a bad place to put it because I'm putting it next to a tandoori kitchen, which is probably going to make a lot of noise. But then you're able to rent it out to different tenants. And they have some slightly different requirements. Like, for instance, financial officers probably require different things to engineering. If I go to engineering, you'll see I can't get them to move into a large one yet because I need more technical officers in order to attract the tenant. So that would mean I just need to build more stuff. Tech officers right here. And, you know, basically facilities that will support that. I could easily get Main Street LLC to move in, and it'll tell you what it needs. Once I hover over it, it's going to expect janitorial services, IT and computer repair services, all that sort of thing needs an electrical line, phone line, prefers upper floors and being close to elevators. You know, and that sounds like, oh god, you've got to really, really work at it to get stuff to move in, but you really don't, because all of those things like IT services, janitorial services, they're basically just a building. As long as you find a place in your tower to plonk one down, you'll be fine until you don't have enough of them. And then you just build another one. There's no strategy involved. There's no thought really involved in any of that. You can place them wherever you want. You know, they can be 40 floors down in the basement and they'll still function just as well as they would be by being nearby. So the planning element just really isn't there. It's just a case of, this needs this, build this. Doesn't matter where, as long as you can afford it and fit it in your tower, you'll be fine. And it's that lack of planning aspect that really, in my opinion, harms the depth of this game. It seems very, very difficult to create a situation in which your tenants are so upset that they'll move out. And when they do move out, you know, you will lose some prestige, absolutely. You can see minus prestige there from move-outs and evictions. It is very, very easy to get that back. And usually, unless a place doesn't have something like power or water or gas when it needs it, nobody's going to move. The only other situation when they will move out is if you don't have enough maintenance officers to clean up and renovate offices and apartments that are getting a little bit grotty. Then they might move out. You can stop them from doing so by micromanaging it and sort of lowering the rent, and it's possible to do that on a room-by-room basis. But it's that lack of stakes, it's that lack of difficulty that has resulted in, after the first few hours of play, me sort of saying to myself, well, what's the point? You know, I've unlocked almost every building, and most of them do the same thing. It's like, I unlocked the luxury goods store. Well, I mean, that's just another store that has higher requirements that make slightly more money. I could build that, or I could not. There are no major buildings with the exception of the subway station, which you get very early on. You just build it and that's it, and it just functions for the rest of the game. You don't need to do a damn thing about it. Now, in Sim Tower, I remember there being big landmarks in that game as to stuff that you could build. Incredible stuff. Like, for instance, you know, when you built your first cinema, there were a lot of things to consider. The cinema was huge. The cinema drew a large amount of people in at specific times, so you needed to make sure that your transportation links and being able to get to and from the cinema were top-notch. They would cause a huge surge in business to surrounding restaurants and stores. So making sure that you had the best stuff there so it could really benefit from that was a huge deal. There was a lot of planning involved in it, and it was a very expensive thing to do as well. You know, you had to get the best movies there. They cost a fortune to put on. So those are the sort of things that would be a large consideration. In this game, there don't really appear to be any buildings like that. Everything is just a relatively simple building with very few special considerations. These are all of these residential services I was talking about, and there are a bunch of office services as well. Basically, just have enough of these, and you will be absolutely fine. You can see it'll even tell you whether or not there's actual demand for it. And your prestige level will drop, but as I said, it will go right back up. And it hasn't stopped me from building any of this stuff. Once you've unlocked the building, even if your prestige falls down, it actually really doesn't matter. You are still able to build everything. There can be something of a cascading effect. I believe the really high-end offices and really high-end stores will consider moving out if your prestige drops too low, but it is, again, very easy to get them back. And as you can see, I'm making money hand over fist. That's the biggest issue I've got with it. There don't really appear to be any true objectives. You can take out what are called contracts, which are sub-objectives and will give you something to work towards. So, for instance, if I sign this one, they want a bunch of large offices. They're going to pay me up front, and then they will pay me upon completion. So I can take that, and it wants me to build a few more large offices. Sure, no problem at all. I can do that. The problem is these contracts have no timer on them. There's no expiration date on these contracts, so there's no risk in taking them. You might think, oh, well, they're paying me up front. That's a risk, right? You know, if I fail, there'd probably be a penalty or something along those lines. The thing is, there isn't. There is no penalty. These can sit here for as long as you wish, and there are no events going on at any point that will affect the operation of your tower. You don't get like a terrorist attack, or you don't have a VIP visiting, so you need to make sure everything's top-notch, or anything along those lines. So your tower just sort of sits there ticking over happily, and you're never at any point stressed out or thinking to yourself, oh god, will I be able to make it from day to day? Am I going to have to sell some stuff? Am I going to have to increase the rent or anything along those lines? The answer to all of those questions is pretty much going to be no, you will not have to do those things. You're just going to sort of sit there building away more buildings, renting out more places, and thinking, well, alright, this started off being relatively interesting, but now everything is just busy work. You know, constructing a new floor, to me by now, is something that I kind of dread, because I know I'm going to have to build a new floor, hook everything up, you know, make sure there are the proper facilities there. If I put a restaurant on that floor, I need to make sure there's space for a recycling bin and stuff like that. And I'm thinking, oh, that's... The sort of joy has gone out of it, which is unfortunate, because it started off pretty strong. I was impressed by the level of detail, for instance. I had a situation where a lot of my residents were like, God, we need coffee. We need coffee. I'm like, well, I already have coffee, surely. I have a little cafe there. And then I found out, oh, that cafe doesn't serve coffee. So you had to actually attract a specific kind of vendor, which I thought was really neat. You know, that's a really cool level of detail that's in there. And that, to me, I thought was very impressive. Unfortunately, it doesn't really keep going to that extent. Once you've fixed that problem, most of the residents are just like, all right, everything's fine. I thought, you know, the construction and the amount of information that you got about your tower was very impressive. You can pull up this report, which I love the theme of this, by the way, that there's a sort of little fax machine printing all of this out. It's going to give you all of the information that you could so desire. You can get a report on the population, find out who's unhappy, who's not happy, look at your prestige rating, look at your feedback from your population, and you can see what exactly they want. Okay, things are breaking a lot, so maybe I just need another maintenance office. They apparently don't like the stairs that much, which is weird, because I have elevators they could very, very easily use, so I'm not really sure what they're complaining about there. So maybe we need to add another maintenance office, if I can find it. Some of the stuff is actually buried a little bit in these menus, which is a little unfortunate. We got a building staff, you know, another maintenance office, probably a very, very good idea. Let's get that added in there, or maybe add a set. Yeah, well, that's as many as we can have. And they also have the buzz system, which you may have noticed. You can put on a media campaign, which will boost various aspects of your tower. And you can also unlock a few different things with influence. The more consultant officers you've got and the better business you're doing in your tower, the more influence you earn, and that will allow you to unlock some stuff. And a lot of it's just sort of generic. You can build one more of this, or this goes faster, or whatever. There's not a lot of unlocks here, outside of being able to place a public art outside your building. The construction of art was... I just really can't see the point of that. It increases your prestige and things like that, but you can't, like, hang it on the wall of an office or anything. You have to display it in an empty area, which seems to me suboptimal, because... generally speaking, you wouldn't really want all of these random empty areas lying all over the place. You could even do things like use wallpaper, which sounds like a nice little bit of customization. The problem is you can't do it in any of the offices or rooms or buildings. You've got to do it in empty zones, and you shouldn't really have those empty zones anyway. It's like, great, cool, I put some wallpaper in. That's great, but that's an empty room. It doesn't serve any practical purpose. So I'm not exactly sure what's going on there. I also have to say, the tower doesn't seem that busy. I remember in Sim Tower, the place sounded like it was bustling because it had all this ambient sound. And what's noticeable about this is that the game is incredibly quiet. You know, even if I zoom into this restaurant, I'm not hearing the ambient sounds and bustle of people ordering and eating food and conversation, all sorts of things like that, which is why I'm sitting here, feel like the tower is just lifeless. You know, it really has not managed to attain that feeling of a incredibly busy, bustling tower that I got from Sim and Ute Tower. And that doesn't sound like a big deal, but to me, it's kind of huge in keeping me interested and also giving me a satisfying feeling that I've really built something where people want to be, work and play and spend their time. As people walk around, I mean, you don't even hear the elevators or anything along those lines. It's just such a sort of crippling lack of sound effects to the point where I almost thought that I'd turned my sound off accidentally, but as you can see, I clearly haven't. So, the conclusion on this one is that it's a solid foundation, but it lacks any real goals and any real stakes. The game, after a few hours, becomes a bunch of mundane busy work. Even if the prestige of your tower absolutely plummets, it doesn't really make any difference. Someone moves out, you can easily just get a new tenant to move in, and it's barely going to affect your bottom line. The amount of money you make is ridiculous. You're never hurting for it past the first couple of hours. These contracts can be completed whenever they want, so there's no risk involved there. And I don't feel these big landmark moments where I unlock a hugely important room or building. They're all just bigger versions of the same thing that require extra services in order to run correctly. And getting those services is not really that difficult, which, unfortunately, as a result, means that the planning involves very little actual real decision-making and strategy. You could pretty much put anything anywhere, and it'll probably do fine. Maybe it won't be hugely happy, but it'll trundle along. Now, I don't see many people moving out because they're pissed off or whatever. So, my hope is that this game actually gets improved by the mods from the workshop. I think that the basics are certainly there. The game runs really, really well. There's just not a big enough variety of interesting buildings, just larger clones of the same thing. All of the decoration aspects are ultimately pointless because you're going to have so few areas where you can actually put them. If you're going to efficiently use the space, bearing in mind that the towers actually can't be that wide, then you don't want to be wasting time with pictures and wallpapers and sculptures and things like that. You know, unless you have a tiny little bit of space left. You know, that could be an extra water closet or whatever. You could move things around there. I'm just not overly impressed with it in terms of a management and planning game. I just don't think it's got the depth. I don't think it's got the longevity as it stands to keep me playing. I've lost interest, as I said, because this has just become laborious now. It's no longer joyful for me to construct these identical-looking offices. I'm not really working towards everything because I've unlocked everything with the exception of loft apartments, and that only took me a few hours. Even if my prestige falls, it doesn't really matter. You know, the only other thing that I can get here is to add an art dealer once I have unlocked it in the policy and consultant influence menu here, which, you know, just takes time. We've just got to sit there accruing influence in order to do that. No big interesting buildings, no cinemas, you know, no cathedral or stadium on the roof or anything along those lines, and no big architectural challenges are on display here. And that's a shame. It really is. There's a good basic framework here. Perhaps with an expansion, with some DLC, or with some mods, this will be a game worth recommending, but to me, at the moment, I don't think this has really improved all that much on Sim Tower, and that game is over 10 years old. You know, I still think nothing tops that in terms of tower construction games, and I hope that with a bit more work and with some support from the community, this game will eventually get there. There's definitely a foundation for that to happen, but after a few flaws, it just becomes the same thing over and over again, and there is a fundamental lack of stakes going on here, which is a shame. Project Highrise, ladies and gentlemen, currently available for $20 or your regional equivalent on Steam. My name has been TotalBiscuit. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, by all means, do feel free to click the like button. If not, the dislike button is right over there. And I'll see you next time.